The Cleveland Browns reworked a contract on Friday. Not a big deal, right? NFL teams do it every single day. But the reworking of this contract probably closes the door forever on one of the more significant Cleveland Browns since 2018. We'll talk about it. Browns 3D starts now. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends, your daily delivery of all things Dog Pound Browns 3D on the OBR. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd. Appreciate all of you for all the support here, certainly for the network as a whole, the written content every day. Of course, the OBR streaming network every night starting at 6 o'clock with Browns 3D leading it off. Tonight at 7 o'clock, you will have Things I Think I Know, Brad Ward hosting. So make sure you guys all stick around for that. And just continue. Look, a lot of positives in the comments lately. Everybody's coming to the OBR, basically saying whatever you need, Cleveland Browns wise, we've got you covered. And they're not right. And they're not wrong, rather. So certainly one of the biggest topics, and this is since the season ended, and nothing's still official yet. And of course, we're talking about, you know, Nick Chubb, of course. The Browns last weekend with a pick in the second round, with a pick in the fourth round, take running backs. Jerome Ford, up until today, was slated to make $3.4 million. A lot of people felt the Browns weren't comfortable paying that amount. And then it comes out today, and it was very quiet, and it wasn't even broken by anybody Browns. I guess somebody was just thumbing through over the cap.com. By the way, highly suggest them over there. They do a great job. And all of a sudden it had come up there through their site that Jerome Ford's contract for 2025 had been reworked, and it was now a 1-year, $1.75 million deal, fully guaranteed for the 2025 season. And there's been a lot of hope from fans, from everybody. I don't think anybody wants to see a player like Nick Chubb leave this organization. But I had mentioned over the last 2 years, after Nick had suffered his second devastating injury, Jerome Ford took the opportunity, and in my opinion, really proved himself to be a decent running back. Not one of the league's best. And I think that's the way it goes with the running back position within the NFL nowadays. You're either top shelf or you're middle of the pack, depending on the team you play for, is, what the end all be all is. There's teams who want that big name bell cow running back. And there's teams, and it looks like the Cleveland Browns could be shifting to be one of those teams, want strength in numbers. There's people still saying they believe that Jerome Ford's contract is tradable at 1.75 million. And I don't necessarily disagree with that. But again, like I said yesterday, why does it have to be that Jerome Ford's the odd guy out to accommodate and keep the relationship with Nick Chubb going? Jerome Ford has done nothing wrong over the last 2 seasons. He has certainly been a solid contributor for this team over the last 2 seasons. I think what he did in 2023 still to this day is extremely underappreciated. Came into that situation, which was a really, really bad situation after Nick went down in Pittsburgh. And right away, Chubb just jumped in like he'd been waiting to do it his entire life and like he'd been ready to do it his entire life. So for me, this isn't about Jerome Ford and a running back room for 2025 of Jerome Ford, Quinshon Judkins, and Dylan Sampson certainly works for me. You're not cutting any of these rookie running backs. They're not going to make it through waivers. You're not going to be able to put them on the practice squad. You're going to bring Nick in as a spot player. How's that going to work? That's not going to work with the fan base. Anytime any running back does something that is, just close to being average, carry for a 1 yard. Why isn't Joe getting the carry? I've seen things suggested like have Nick become the third down back. No, receiving was never the strength of Nick Chubb's game. And to be honest, when we're talking about Chubb, Ford, Judkins, Sampson, the best receiving back of the group is certainly Jerome Ford. Certainly proved that in 2023. So some suggest that, maybe Nick can battle this out in preseason. Even if you re-sign Nick and you thought there was a possibility he could help this team in 2025, there's no way with his injury history you're going to put him on the field in preseason games. Again, that dog don't hunt. I think it's time, and I think we all just have to understand again that it's time for Nick Chubb and the Cleveland Browns to go their separate ways. Drafted in the second round in 2018 by former general manager John Dorsey. Wasn't a bad draft for Dorsey back in 2018. It wasn't. Browns got some players out of that class. Got into the summer, saw a little bit of Nick. And if everybody remembers in those days, Nick was wearing that god awful number 31. He just looked terrible in it. Eventually gets jersey number 24. We get to the regular season, and the kid's getting no run. We were watching Carlos 3.7 yards per carry Hyde take and monopolize every carry there was to be had. The Thursday night game where Baker comes in for Tyrod Taylor, Carlos Hyde, the great story. He basically walked over from the hospital after his wife gave birth. It was a fun story that night. 10 days later, the team goes out to Oakland. First career start for Baker Mayfield. Throws a touchdown pass, a long one, to Darren Fells. First career touchdown pass for Baker Mayfield in the NFL to Darren Fells. If you guys knew that one, you're up on your history. Darren Fells, as me and Pete Smith used to like to call him, playmaker. But in that game as well, I don't know, maybe if it was the West Coast air, maybe Hyde needed a blow or two. They actually let Chubb touch the ball a couple times that day. If I remember correctly, and I know it was only 3 carries. I want to say it was 3 carries, 114 yards, 2 touchdowns. First carry, and it goes up the middle, and you got to keep in mind this was in Oakland, so literally running on the infield dirt. And it blasts through up the middle, and then just gets an extra giddy up at about the 15 and into the end zone. Next quarter, goes on the outside, on the right side, zips up the sidelines. Boom. But again, wasn't enough to get Nick Chubb on the field. Finally, you get closer to the trade deadline, and the Friday, as this team is packing up to fly to Tampa. And I still remember this day. I still remember the next day and that Tampa game all too well. Browns trade Carlos Hyde to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Basically, John Dorsey tells you, Jackson, I will trade your running back just so you can play the one that should be playing. They literally had to trade Carlos Hyde away to make sure that Hugh Jackson would play Nick Chubb. I was October 19th, 2018. The reason I remember it so well was actually the next day my brother had actually passed away. Then I remember the Tampa game. Nick Chubb had a hell of a game. Browns got stuffed like twice on QB sneaks. And it was like, well, what are you doing? Nick Chubb was the key. You put him in there. And even still, what was Hugh Jackson doing? QB sneaking with Baker Mayfield. It was just idiocy. Hugh was gone a few weeks later. Of course, Nick went on to absolute greatness. But for now, and what appears to be forever, it's just not a situation here anymore. I don't know how much faith, and I don't think it's a question of the Browns having faith that Nick can maybe put together another season. It's certainly possible. Or is it faith that, the Browns think they're truly in it this year? It would make sense if you were bringing Nick back for that, right? He was a part of it for all these many years. But I don't think that's the case really necessarily for any of this. So I think the Browns made a decision that it's just time to get young. And look, Nick wouldn't have cost any money. He probably would have been making Jerome Ford money at worst. I think the Browns just figured it was time to go in a different direction. And, you know, if Nick were to come back and he just wasn't Nick, look, he already had some small people chirping into the wind last year, realizing that he just wasn't the Nick Chubb that, we had been accustomed to. It was 3.3 yards per carry. And here's a guy who was usually closer to 5.3 yards per carry than even knocking on the door of 3.3 yards per carry. Look, it's time for them to run this room the way they feel organizationally they should run this room. And that is with multiple backs, younger, cheaper. I know it's tough for everybody. It really is. And, me covering this team since 2017 really hasn't been a lot of stalwarts for this team. Certainly Miles and David of 2018, Denzel and Nick. These have been the dudes, for my run here covering this team. And I hate it, but I understand it. And I agree that I feel that it's probably the right approach for this team. A lot of people, well, you can still move forward. The money's guaranteed. The contract is easy to move if you want to. It was just the largest running back class in the draft in NFL history. It's just not a market to be paying running backs right now, trading for them. And even still, if you're going to try to trade for Jerome, why isn't Jerome going to say, hey, any chance for an extension here? So, again, I just don't know how you bring him in and you just say, let's get through training camp and see where it's at. You can ask Nick to play specials. Nick's going to take some meaningless carries in preseason games to prove his worth. Again, I just, you really appreciated the era. You really appreciated everything Nick Chubb was. And unlike any other position in the NFL, the running back career is just a blink of the eye. Look, everything these days goes supremely fast, right? I mean, I literally just found out. I think Curtis Martin has already been in the Hall of Fame for like 15 years. 15 years. He's already been in the Hall of Fame. 15 years. Blows my mind. But to think for where you were that April night when Nick Chubb was drafted to here we are now in 2025, and that's it. It's over. Most likely, I don't see a way it's going to work out. And, if Nick truly wants to play this year, I don't see how the Browns or the opportunity for him. But again, it looks like the plan has been made. And it's just the way it's going to be. I'm excited for the team this year, certainly at the running back position. Excited. Jerome Ford, final year, is not going to definitely not be looking at over his shoulder this year. Kind of will be though, right? Um, Not maybe looking over the shoulder, maybe playing in the shadow, perhaps. Probably better terminology, right? He can kind of be his own guy, but he's got these two young, talented guys behind him. I think the Browns, the emphasis is they're going to try to run the ball. Hopefully, running the ball can be their recipe for success. An improved defense regardless who the quarterback is. I don't think the plan is going to be any different. You have three backs, all have really good talent, all have pretty good skill, all have the ability to take it to the house, all can find the end zone. Just fun players, talented players, big shoes to fill. And I'm sure the Browns fans will probably be a little bit critical of him early. They are losing one of their absolute favorites here. And to think, that conceivably he will be on another team, let alone the Browns may have to face him if the rumors are true. And it is that the Chicago Bears might be the destination. That certainly will make for an interesting scenario, no question whatsoever. But it's going to be the kid's time. It's going to be a younger time here. The Browns are trying to get overall younger. They're trying to get less expensive. Spent a lot of money because they thought they had a window. Certainly didn't correlate. So now time to rein in the finances a little bit, roll over a bunch of money in the next year, create a whole bunch of cap space once again, which this team likes to do. Offensively, you wonder exactly just how this unit is going to function. And I think that a lot of it comes down to you view who maybe the quarterback's going to be. You know, if it's Joe, run, play action, some deep stuff. I'm not sure again how Kenny Pickett fits into all this. I know a lot of people want to say, well, Kenny's the first one they brought in. And yeah, that's factually correct, yes. But just because he was brought in as early as he was, and Joe was brought in what, week before the draft, then you brought in two during the draft. Is that more an indictment on Kenny Pickett than necessarily Kenny Pickett was the first guy brought in? He was the first guy brought in. And then within 8 days of each other, they brought in three. I think a lot when you talk about the Browns offense in 2025, and this is another one here because with Elijah Moore signing with Buffalo the other day, and everybody, well, the Browns, they need it. Look, the Browns roster is no different today than when it was when the season ended against Baltimore in January. So the fact that after almost 3.5 months, Elijah Moore finally signs with a different team, and everybody, oh, well, the Browns, look, obviously they didn't want to continue the relationship. They're the ones that left him on the market for 3.5 months. I'm not sure Moore's going to put up much better production in Buffalo. And it's not a knock on Moore. It's just a better overall football team. And there are more receivers there. A lot more competition for receptions there. Also, two good tight ends. Also, a great running back who needs to get paid. That's another story for another day. But I think for this offense and the expectation which you can have for the Cleveland Browns offense in 2025 comes down to what you believe Cedric Tillman is. And look, I'm going to give you some numbers. This is based off of 3 games. So this by no means is concrete when we're talking about Cedric Tillman. But, and let's make sure we got it right here, from October 20th last year to November 3rd, 3-game stretch, Cedric Tillman was averaging 7 catches for 85 yards and a touchdown per. Again, 3-game, small sample size. Then you got closer to that Thursday night game, the hit, and that was it for the season. Our own Fred Greetham was with Cedric Tillman Saturday up in Albany. Reported back to us. Everything seems good. Said he's rocking. Said he's ready to roll. Very excited. But if you can get near that 785 1 TD for Cedric Tillman that you had in that 3-game stretch last year, I think that changes a lot of things on the offensive side of the ball for you. Is that 3-game stretch legitimate? Is that the window of what you're possibly getting from Tillman here in 2025? If you can get that, that's huge. Huge. Absolutely huge. He'll be a big, big part of it. Be a big, big success to it. I think Tillman would play well with any of the quarterbacks. Just got to find that zone for him. And a lot of it was, balls 8 yards past the line of scrimmage and then an 8 to 15 yard range. Obviously, caught that beautiful, big, deep one. And, close out the Baltimore game. That was huge, huge moment, right? So, start questions. And, do the Browns ultimately bring in yet another wide receiver? It's certainly possible. It's certainly possible. Again, you're going to look to Green Bay. You're going to look to New England. Look to those teams, see if there's a possibility they want to move on from one of their wide receivers as they're both deep. They're not going to be able to keep everybody, I should say. It's been a fun week here, you know, letting it all sink in. At this point, 1 week ago, all you had on your belt was Mason Graham. It was right about this time 1 week ago that all of a sudden the talk was starting to pick up a little bit that, the Browns may seriously be getting close to finalizing that pick. I'm sorry, that was less than a week ago, but we were right around this time last Thursday. Friday, we all sat here. When's Jalen Milroe going? When's Jalen Milroe going? Are they picking him at 33? Are they picking him at 36? Then once we got closer to it actually happening, hey, Ohio State running back. We all thought it was Travion. Turned out to be Quinjon. Carson Swessinger picked a couple picks before there. And I'm really, 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 the more I watch, the more I find, the more I fire up. It's not a linebacker's never always going to get me super, super excited, but Carson Swessinger looks to be everything and then some. And the more people I talk to and I can get feedback from, and just again, the theme of the Browns 2025 draft class was getting good people, getting good kids, good ball players, good kids, and seems to be the consensus on anybody you talk to in regards to Carson Swessinger. So I just lost my train of thought there for 1 second. Both quarterbacks, and again, this will be the talk of everything. From here we sit in May for the next 4 months. If Dylan Gabriel has one thing going for him, it is certainly that it appears that the Browns preferred him, right? But so far in the PR war, in the PR battles, Shador's camp has got him in a really good spot. And I spoke on this yesterday, as we start to learn more about Shador. And again, not Shador Sanders, just Shador himself. And you find out more that, going to schools for him was something he did on the regular. Wanted to take his opportunity. And I love the way he said it. The reason he did it is because he felt if he was one of those kids, that's something he would have thought was really cool. Somebody putting himself out there like that for younger kids, giving up their time, giving up their advice, giving up their experiences. And ain't no high school kid in the world going to turn down a couple slices of free pizza, right? So, for Shador, this has been a really, really nice start thus far. Again, what he's doing out in the public, in the community, ain't going to mean nothing as far as him, being the starting quarterback, leading this team to victories, ultimately taking Cleveland to a Super Bowl. But it's certainly a nice start. And I said many a times in regards to Sanders and his dad and the way it was all going on, million times I screamed. And I know a lot of you heard it because I know a lot of it comes up, and I appreciate you guys, appreciate, putting my words out there for me in regards to doing this without an agent. You don't have an agent for damage control situations. You have an agent so a situation doesn't handle needing damage control. And that was the one thing that the man, the myth, the legend, primetime Deion Sanders didn't truly understand. I don't think he respected the process enough, understood enough about the process in this day and age. And at the end of the day, it ultimately hurt his boy. Shador Sanders was never a fifth round pick. As much as he was never a number 2 overall pick, he was not a 144th overall pick. And their negligence and probably lack of respect of the draft process is probably what hurt his boy. And that is why you needed an agent. Because an agent would have said, Dion, you don't do this every year. I do. Here is my list of clients. Here are my people that I've taken care of every single year. I have this plan from you from the day you signed to me to the day he puts on that NFL cap when he is drafted. And that was a huge, huge mistake by the Sanders camp. Now, Shador comes in here, certainly a little aggravated. But you want to know what? I think Shador also comes in here with less pressure on his shoulders. If not that he ever would have been, but if he had been the number 2 overall pick, the pressure would have been enormous. Enormous. Being the 144th pick, being the second quarterback drafted. Sure, there's pressure. You're only on a 5th round rookie contract. You won't make that money. Well, you got to get to the next contract. So he can come in, he can play free, can play loose, just go about doing his business. And again, for thus far that he's been here, seems like he's really, a lot more of a fun young man than maybe we all knew. And again, they limited things for the draft process. If we had maybe got to see him work out at the combine, maybe you would have saw more shades of the personality that's actually in there. But what we've seen thus far in a couple of days here with Cleveland, looks like a fun young man, truly enjoying it. I think the big test is, where's he going to be Sunday night? I mean, let's talk about this already. I mean, you've got the Guardians doing the wrist up. You've got Cleveland Guardians players doing the wrist up for a guy who was drafted in the 5th round, for a guy who realistically is probably the 4th quarterback on the depth chart right now for the Cleveland Browns. But your baseball team in town noticed. I'm sure the basketball team's already noticed. It's going to be interesting because, he's going to come to play. Everybody's going to come and compete. It's going to be fun to watch to see the way it all works out. It really is. Because, right now, kid's been in town, 48, 72 hours. And his name is Whiteley. Oh, literally. Whitehouse. Again, obviously been busy last 2 weeks with all the pre-draft, the actual draft coverage, and now post-draft coverage here in the OBR. Whether it, is all the articles from our fantastic team of writers, and these guys have been absolutely killing it the last 3 weeks. Big appreciation to everybody who pours out for that every single day. The OBR streaming network starting every night at 6 o'clock with myself here hosting Browns 3D. Several shows throughout the week. Quincy Carrier Monday, the React on Tuesday, Fred and Barry on Wednesday, All Eyes yesterday. And then, of course, tonight you will get Things I Think I Know. Brad Ward hosting that, so make sure you guys are here for that. Always a really good time. Brad does a fantastic job. Always deep and thorough. So we appreciate you all. Make sure you're subscribed, of course, to the OBR over on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe, of course, to the OBR over on Twitch. We thank you all very much. Browns 3D on the OBR streaming network. I am your host, Jeff Lloyd. And again, we thank you all for coming out for the written word, the video content here at the OBR every single day. I hope everybody has an incredible weekend. Stay safe. I see the weather has been terrible out there for a few days, so I hope everybody's doing all right as far as that is concerned. But this has been your daily delivery of all things dog pound. Browns 3D on the OBR, and we will talk to y'all next week.